Boeing and Airbus now virtually monopolize commercial aircraft production, and one of the more comical performances in the World Trade Organization is their constant battle about which one gains more state support in our free market economies. Boeing is a virtual offshoot of the U.S. Air Force and NASA, the space agency. It's now transformed itself into largely a managerial operation. It supervises the production of parts abroad. Similarly, the Obama administration, which has pretty much taken over the auto industry, is helping it to dismantle manufacturing plants, destroying the lives of the workforce and communities, while the Secretary of Transportation flies to Europe to use federal stimulus money to obtain contracts for the high-speed rail transport that the country desperately needs and that could be built by the skilled workforce in the plants that are now being dismantled, but with less profit for the financial institutions that increasingly govern the society. Actually, there was an interesting illustration of that just this morning. The Ford Motor Company is thinking of dismantling plants in the United States and transferring them right across the border to Canada. A very similar society, but different in some respects. One is that it has a more or less rational healthcare program. In the United States, healthcare is about twice the per capita cost of other industrial countries and some of the worst outcomes. And it's the only privatized system with very little regulation. Two factors, of course, correlate. And it costs auto companies $1,000 or more a year to produce a car in Detroit and across the border, largely because of the healthcare costs. And right now in Washington, the insurance corporations and the financial institutions are exulting because they have succeeded in preventing any meaningful change in the healthcare system, and one effect is further transfer of productive production from Detroit to, say, Windsor, Canada, right across the border. The connections are obvious, but rarely drawn. The collapse of the financial institutions and also the collapse of the reigning doctrines of efficient markets have posed no long-term problem, except, of course, for the general population. The primary agents of the collapse were at once selected by President Obama to put some bandages on the wounds, and they performed their task admirably. The banks and the investment firms are delighted with their performance. Profits and bonuses have risen to historic heights thanks to the huge public bailout and the success of the masters of the universe in undermining any thought of meaningful regulation. There were some fears that the Senate might venture into this dangerous territory, but the fears were overcome 2 days ago when the Senate Banking Committee surrendered to business power. So any thought of minor regulation is now out the window. The biggest firms, like Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan Chase, are even bigger than before and are able to drive out competitors thanks to the government-organized mergers and their privileged access to cheap credit, all backed with a significant expansion of the government insurance policy, which is called too big to fail, that enables them to make risky and hence profitable transactions without undue concern about consequences because they'll be bailed out. Accordingly, they are prospering while regional and community banks, which serve the public, are struggling and steadily failing, so the business press informs us. Actually, the scandal has reached such proportions that the leading business weekly, Businessweek, ran a cover story with the title Wall Street versus America. They were reviewing how sharp lawyers and investment firms managed to cheat cities, towns, pension funds, and other public entities of billions of dollars with deceptive claims and hidden conditions, leaving wreckage in their wake, all within the law, such as it is. The too-big-to-fail government insurance policy exacerbates an inherent inefficiency of markets. In a transaction, the participants look out for their own welfare, but they ignore what economists call externalities, the impact on others. So if it's well managed, Goldman Sachs takes into account the cost to itself if a loan fails, but it doesn't take into account what's called systemic risk, the effect throughout the financial system, which can be huge. In fact, as we've just once again seen, well, that's almost bound to bring the system down periodically. All of that is well known but ignored, and in any event, the powerful win. Alan Greenspan, who was the prophet of the religion that markets know best, did pronounce the words irrational exuberance during the tech boom of the late 1990s that he supervised. And he's been criticized since for not following through to do something about it, particularly when the tech boom was followed by an $8 trillion housing boom, which somehow escaped the notice of the Federal Reserve Bank that he headed, as well as almost all economists. But it's the wrong criticism. It's completely rational exuberance when the government is there to bail you out. The basic insight was provided by Adam Smith. He pointed out that the principal architects of policy in England, in his day that was the merchants and manufacturers, he said they make sure that their own interests are carefully secured by the policies they design, however grievous the impact on others, including the general population. Much has changed in the past 250 years, but Smith's maxim retains its force, and we're seeing it today. The same is true of fundamental market inefficiencies. They remain. By now they are so severe that they suggest a revision in the guiding theme of the early global justice movement, the theme that a better world is possible. By now we have to ask whether a world is possible at all, at least a world in which there's some hope for decent survival. The predictable failure of the Copenhagen Conference brings that question to the fore quite ominously. The masters of the universe have announced publicly that they will do everything they can to undermine even mild energy and environmental legislation in the United States. And their intense propaganda has been extremely successful. In the United States, concern over global warming has dropped very sharply during the past year due to intense business propaganda. Most people are just confused. By now, barely a third of the population think that human activity contributes to global warming. Well, the masters understand, as well as the scientific community, that their actions may lead to a terminal crisis and that the world that they mostly own may well be destroyed. But their choices are quite rational within the reigning institutional and doctrinal systems. The goal is short-term profit and market control. The fate of the species can be dismissed as an externality, and those who refuse to play that game are likely to be forced to abandon it. The term capitalism is hardly appropriate for the prevailing systems designed by the architects of policy, systems that socialize cost and risk and privatize eventual profits. But the fundamental market deficiencies remain, and they are well implanted in the political economy, and the power of concentrated capital has predictably lethal impact. Unless the global justice movement is able to show that a new world is possible, and soon, the opportunity to do so may be lost forever.